Welcome to the Secret Lives channel.
She stood in the corner of the ballroom, clutching a tray of champagne, invisible to the family she had married into, to the wealthy Rutherfords. Veyron was nothing more than a mistake, a penniless nobody their son had dragged home, a stain on their pristine Greenwich reputation. They mocked her cheap dress, laughed at her silence, and forced her to serve their guests. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that the silent giant at the door, the billionaire security tycoon everyone feared, wasn't there for the party. He was there for her. And when he drops to one knee, the Rutherford dynasty won't just crumble, it will be erased. You need to hear this story. The sound of a baccarat crystal glass shattering against the imported Italian marble floor echoed through the foyer of the Rutherford estate. It was a sharp, violent sound, followed immediately by a silence that was even worse. "Look what you've done!" Beatrice Rutherford hissed, her voice low and venomous. She didn't shout. Women of her standing in Greenwich, Connecticut, did not shout. They eviscerated you with a whisper. That flute was a wedding gift from the DuPonts. It is worth more than your entire education. Veyron knelt immediately, her knees hitting the cold stone as she reached for the shards. "I'm sorry, Beatrice. I didn't see the edge of the table." "You never see anything. Do you?" Beatrice stepped back, pulling the hem of her silk Dior gown away, as if Veyron were contagious. "You are clumsy, unrefined, and frankly, a liability. Tonight is the most important night of Paul's career. The senator is coming. The board of directors from Sovereign Bank is coming. And you are wearing that." Veyron looked down at her dress. It was a simple navy sheath dress she had bought from a department store rack. It was clean, modest, and fitted her slender frame perfectly. But in this house, the lack of a designer label was a moral failing. "It was all I had," Veyron said softly, "because you have no money of your own." A new voice chimed in. Brittany, Paul's sister, sauntered down the grand staircase. She was holding a martini, her eyes gleaming with the cruelty that only boredom and a trust fund could breed. "Honestly, Tori, it's embarrassing. Paul tries so hard to legitimize you, but you just drag him down. You look like the catering staff. Actually, that's an insult to the caterers. At least they have uniforms." Veyron bit her lip. "Tasting iron." She picked up the large shard of crystal, cutting her thumb slightly. A drop of bright red blood welled up. She hid it quickly in her palm. Where was Paul? Her husband of 2 years was currently in the library, likely pouring a scotch and pretending not to hear his mother and sister tearing his wife apart. It had been like this since the day they met. Paul Rutherford, the golden boy of private equity, had fallen for Veyron, a quiet art historian he'd met in a dusty archive in London. He had loved her silence, her poise, her mystery. But once he brought her home to Connecticut, the sharks had smelled blood. Veyron had no known family, no pedigree, no inheritance. To the Rutherfords, she was a gold digger who had trapped their son. "Get up," Beatrice commanded. "Since you look like the help, you might as well make yourself useful. The catering team is short-handed for the cocktail hour. Go to the kitchen and help chef distribute the hors d'oeuvres. And for God's sake, stay out of the photos." "Paul wanted me by his side for the greeting," Veyron said. Standing up, she was taller than Beatrice, but she slumped her shoulders, making herself smaller. It was a habit she had formed to survive. "Paul wants to close the deal with the Kensington Group," Beatrice snapped. "Do you really think Chadwick Kensington wants to shake hands with a nobody who breaks Crystal Go? kitchen. Now. Veyron looked toward the library door. It remained closed. The message was clear. You are on your own. She turned and walked toward the servants' quarters, her head high but her heart hammering against her ribs. As the swing door closed behind her, she heard Brittany laugh. God, Mum, she's so pathetic. Who raised her wolves? Beatrice's reply was muffled but audible. Wolves would have taught her to bite back. She's a sheep, and sheep are made for slaughter. In the sterile, stainless steel hum of the commercial kitchen, Veyron moved to the sink to wash the blood from her thumb. The stinging water felt grounding. She looked at her reflection in the window hazel eyes, dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a sleek, black phone. It wasn't the iPhone Paul had bought her. It was an encrypted device with no brand markings, something military grade. There was one unread message. Sender H. D. V. Locals are restless. Security detail is holding position at the perimeter. Are we green for the extraction? Veyron stared at the screen. She could end this now. She could type green. And within 3 minutes, a tactical team would rappel through the skylights. Or, more subtly, a convoy of black SUVs would tear up the manicured lawn. And men who toppled governments would force Beatrice Rutherford to apologize on her knees. She typed back, Hold. Not yet. I promised Paul I'd try one last time, but keep the asset on standby. If tonight goes south, we burn the bridge. She slipped the phone back into her pocket just as the head caterer, a stressed man named Henri, shoved a tray of lobster tartlets into her hands. You, the madam, said you're helping. Take these to the West Wing. And smile, for heaven's sake. Veyron took the tray. A cold, terrifying calm settled over her. They wanted a servant. She would give them the best servant they had ever seen, because she knew something they didn't. Chadwick Kensington, the billionaire investor they were all desperate to impress tonight, wasn't just a business partner. He was her godfather's accountant. And the royal bodyguard rumors circulating about the guest of honor, he used to drive her to ballet practice. The gala was in full swing by 8 p.m. The Rutherford mansion was a spectacle of excess. An ice sculpture of a swan dominated the buffet, and a string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, though no one was listening. Veyron moved through the crowd, a phantom in navy blue. She offered tartlets to men who looked through her and women who sneered. Paul, darling. Veyron froze. She was near the patio doors. Paul was standing there, holding a scotch, looking devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo. But he wasn't alone. He was cornered by a woman in a shimmering red dress, Lydia van der Woodson, the woman Beatrice actually wanted him to marry. Lydia, Paul said, his smile tight. You look expensive. I look available, Lydia purred, placing a hand on his lapel. I heard your little mouse is working the catering tonight. That's so appropriate. Beatrice told me she finally found her calling. Paul sighed, looking down into his drink. Mother is being difficult. Veyron is just trying to help out. Help out, Lydia laughed. Paul, wake up. She's an anchor around your neck. Chadwick Kensington is arriving in 20 minutes. Do you think he's going to take you seriously when your wife is serving pigs in a blanket? Veyron is intelligent. Lydia, she's a nobody. Lydia interrupted sharply. And in our world, nobodies get eaten. You need a partner. Paul. Someone who knows the game. Veyron gripped the silver tray so hard her knuckles turned white. "Defend me," she begged silently. "Just once. Say it." Paul swirled his ice. "Let's not talk about her. Lydia. Not tonight. Too much is at stake." Veyron felt a crack in her chest, wider and deeper than the shattered crystal in the foyer. He hadn't defended her. He had dismissed her. She turned to leave, blinded by tears, and bumped straight into a wall of muscle. "Watch it," a man barked. It was Chadwick Kensington's advance team. Or rather, a security guard hired for the night. But behind him, the main doors blew open. The room fell silent. Chadwick, Chad. Kensington walked in. He was a man of 60, tanned from years in St. Marc-Tropez, wearing a suit that cost more than the Rutherfords' cars. But he wasn't the center of attention. Walking half a step behind him was a man who sucked the oxygen out of the room. He was massive, 6'5", with shoulders that strained the fabric of his bespoke charcoal suit. He had a shaved head, a thick scar running through his left eyebrow, and eyes like chips of blue ice. This was Hugo de Vries. A collective gasp went through the room. Hugo de Vries wasn't just a bodyguard. He was the owner of Aegis Global, the most expensive private military contractor in the world. He provided security for kings, sultans, and the G7 summits. He didn't attend parties in Connecticut. He was a billionaire in his own right, a man who never spoke to the press and was rumored to have killed a man with a ballpoint pen in Jakarta. Beatrice Rutherford practically sprinted across the room, shoving Veyron aside with her hip. The tray of tartlets wobbled, and one slid off, landing on Beatrice's shoe. Beatrice gasped. The music stopped. "You clumsy idiot!" Beatrice shrieked, forgetting her Greenwich whisper. She pointed a manicured finger at Veyron. "Get out, you've ruined everything. Get out of my sight." The entire room turned to look. Paul looked horrified, but he didn't move toward his wife. He stayed by Lydia's side. Veyron stood frozen. The humiliation was total. She was the spectacle, the failure, the dirt on the shoe. Chadwick Kensington looked at the scene with mild amusement, but Hugo de Vries stopped her moving. The giant turned his head slowly. His icy gaze swept over Beatrice, then Paul, and finally landed on Veyron. Beatrice, realizing the attention was on the help, tried to recover. She laughed nervously, turning to Hugo. "Mr. de Vries, Mr. Kensington. So honored, please. Ignore the staff. We have having a little issue with competence tonight. Please, come this way. We have the vintage Dom Perignon." "Staff." The word came from Hugo. His voice was a deep rumble, like thunder trapped in a cave. It vibrated through the floorboards. He ignored Beatrice's outstretched hand. He walked past Chadwick Kensington. He walked past the senator. He walked straight toward Veyron. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Veyron looked up at the man towering over her. Her heart rate slowed. The fear vanished, replaced by a weary resignation. "Hello, Hugo," she whispered. Hugo de Vries, the man who terrified terrorists and presidents alike, did something that made the entire room stop breathing. He dropped to one knee. He bowed his head, lowering his eyes to the floor, exposing his vulnerable neck to her. It was the bow of a Praetorian guard to his empress. "Ma'am," Hugo said, his voice ringing clearly in the silent hall. "I received the distress signal. My men have secured the perimeter. The jet is fueled at Teterboro." He looked up, his eyes burning with a fierce, terrifying loyalty. "Does the Duchess wish to terminate the target?" Beatrice Rutherford dropped her champagne flute. This time, nobody cared about the sound of breaking glass. Veyron looked at her mother-in-law, whose face had gone the color of ash. She looked at Paul, who was staring at Hugo with his mouth open. Veyron slowly unbuttoned her catering jacket, revealing the silk blouse beneath. She handed the empty tray to a stunned Brittany. "Stand up, Hugo," Veyron said, her voice changing. The softness was gone. In its place was the cold, hard steel of a woman who was born to rule. "We aren't leaving yet. I haven't had my dinner." The silence in the ballroom was heavy, a physical weight that pressed down on the chests of the Rutherford family. Hugo de Vries stood slowly, his massive frame unfolding like a darker, more dangerous version of the unfolding events. He did not look at Beatrice, Paul, or the gaping guests. His eyes remained fixed on Veyron, awaiting her command. "Duchess." Brittany Rutherford broke the silence, her voice a shrill mixture of confusion and intoxication. She gestured wildly with her martini glass, splashing a bit of olive brine onto the floor. Is this a skit? Did you hire an actor? Veyron. Because it's tacky, even for you." Beatrice let out a breath she had been holding, latching onto her daughter's explanation like a lifeline. "Of course," she laughed, though the sound was brittle and frantic. "A prank? How droll. Veyron, really, hiring the help to embarrass us on a night like this. Tell this man to leave before I call the police." "The police?" Hugo turned his head. The movement was mechanical, predatory. He reached into his jacket pocket. Paul stepped forward, finding a shred of courage. "Now look here. I don't know who you think you are, but you're trespassing. My wife obviously put you up to this childish game, but—" Hugo produced a wallet, flipped it open, and revealed a badge. It wasn't a police badge. It was a diplomatic crest embossed in gold, flanked by identification from Interpol and the Diplomatic Security Service. "My name is Commander Hugo de Vries, Head of Protection for the House of Valerius," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "And I am currently operating on sovereign soil. If you attempt to call the local police, they will be routed to my dispatch. If you attempt to touch Her Royal Highness again, I will classify it as an act of aggression against a foreign dignitary, and I will respond with lethal force." Beatrice's face went slack. "House of Valerius!" A gasp rippled through the older guests. The senator, a man named Robert Sterling who had been ignoring Veyron all night, dropped his cane. He pushed through the crowd, his face pale. "Valerius?" The senator stammered, looking at Veyron with fresh eyes. "As in, the Valerius Trust, the Grand Duchy of Valerius." Veyron finally moved. She didn't look at the senator. She looked at her husband. "Paul," she said softly, "do you remember our honeymoon when we went to Luxembourg, and I asked to visit the old castle on the hill, the one that wasn't open to the public?" Paul blinked, confused by the sudden change in topic. "Yes, you said you liked the architecture. We took a selfie at the gate." "We took a selfie at the gate because the guards wouldn't let you in," Veyron corrected him. "They let me in. You just didn't see it because you were too busy checking your emails." She reached up and pulled the pins from her hair. The severe bun cascaded down in dark, glossy waves. She straightened her spine, shedding the posture of the beaten wife and assuming a stance that was regal, ancient, and terrifying. "I am Veyron Alexandra Valerius," she announced, her voice carrying to the back of the room without shouting. "Grand Duchess of the Valerius Enclave, and majority shareholder of the sovereign bank you are so desperate to impress tonight." She turned to Chadwick Kensington, the billionaire, the man Beatrice had practically prostrated herself before, bowed low. "Your Highness," Chadwick said, his tone reverent, "I apologize for the deception. When you asked me to audit the Rutherford accounts personally, I didn't realize the extent of the disrespect." "Audit," Beatrice whispered. "But you're here for the merger." "I am here," Chadwick said, straightening up and fixing Beatrice with a look of disdain, "because Her Highness summoned me. The Valerius Trust owns the Kensington Group. Beatrice, we have owned it for 40 years. I am merely an employee. Veyron is the owner." The reality of the situation hit the room like a bomb. The woman who had been scrubbing stains off the carpet, the woman who had been mocked for her department store dress, was effectively the boss of every powerful person in the room. Lydia Vander Woodson, realizing she had just insulted a woman who could buy and sell her entire lineage, tried to slink away into the crowd. "Lydia," Veyron said. She didn't shout. She just spoke the name. And Lydia froze. "Don't leave yet. I believe you said I looked like the catering staff. I think we should test that theory. Hugo." "Ma'am." "Have the staff bring a chair for me. Center of the room. And bring a chair for my husband." Two of Hugo's men, who had materialized from the shadows, brought 2 ornate chairs to the center of the ballroom. Veyron sat down, crossing her legs with an elegance that made Beatrice's earlier posturing look like a cheap pantomime. "Sit, Paul," Veyron commanded. Paul sat. He looked like a child caught stealing candy. He looked at his mother, but Beatrice was hyperventilating near the ice sculpture. "For 2 years," Veyron said, her eyes boring into Paul's, "I lived a lie, not to trick you, but to see you. I wanted to know if you loved me, or if you just wanted a trophy. I wanted to know if your family had a heart, or just a balance sheet." "Tori, please," Paul pleaded. Reaching for her hand, Hugo stepped forward, his hand hovering over his sidearm, but Veyron held up a hand to stop him. "Don't call me Tori," she said coldly. "Tori was the girl who cleaned your messes. Tori is gone." She looked around the room at the Greenwich elite. "You all laughed," she said. "You watched Beatrice treat me like a dog, and you laughed. You, Senator. You, Mrs. Vanderbilt. You watched a human being get humiliated, and you drank your champagne." She turned to Henri, the head caterer, who was trembling by the kitchen door. "Henri," she called out. "Yes." "Your Highness, you were kind to me. You gave me an ice pack when I burned my hand last Thanksgiving. You saved me a plate of food when Beatrice told the staff not to feed me." Henri nodded, tears in his eyes. "Hugo," Veyron said, "write Henri a check for $5 million and set him up with his own restaurant in Manhattan, whatever location he wants." The room gasped. Hugo pulled out a checkbook, scribbled on it using a gold fountain pen, and walked over to the stunned caterer, placing the slip of paper in his pocket. "Now," Veyron said, standing up. "I believe there was supposed to be a dinner. Beatrice, you've been bragging about the menu for weeks. I think it's time we ate." I can't," Beatrice stammered. "Oh, you can." Veyron smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "And you will, because if you don't, I recall the mortgage on this estate is held by Sovereign Bank, a bank I control. I could call in that loan tonight. Unless, of course, you host me properly." Beatrice nodded frantically. "Dinner?" "Yes, dinner is served." Veyron took Hugo's arm. "Shall we, Commander?" "After you, ma'am." The dining room of the Rutherford estate was designed to intimidate. The table was a 20-foot slab of mahogany, beneath a chandelier that had once hung in a French palace. Usually, Beatrice sat at the head, with Paul at the foot, and Veyron relegated to the middle, often squeezed between loud guests who ignored her. Tonight, the seating chart had been revised. Veyron sat at the head of the table. Hugo stood directly behind her right shoulder, a silent sentinel. Chadwick Kensington sat to her right. Beatrice was forced to sit on the side, squeezed between the senator and a very nervous Lydia. Paul sat opposite his mother, looking pale and nauseous. The first course was served in silence. Lobster bisque. The only sound was the clinking of silver against china. "So," Veyron began, breaking the tension. She dipped her spoon into the soup with perfect etiquette. "Paul, tell me about the Kensington deal. You were so eager to discuss it earlier." Paul choked on his water. He dabbed his mouth with a napkin, his hand shaking. "Veyron, I don't think this is the time." "It is exactly the time," she interrupted. "You've spent months telling me I don't understand business. You told me I was simple. Educate me. Pitch the deal." Paul looked at Chadwick, begging for help. Chadwick merely swirled his wine, looking amused. "Well," Paul started, his voice cracking, "the proposal is, Rutherford Private Equity wants to leverage the emerging tech assets to cover your losses in the Asian markets." Veyron finished for him. She didn't look up from her soup. "You lost $40 million in the Hong Kong real estate crash 3 months ago. You've been cooking the books to hide it from the board. You need Chadwick's capital injection to plug the hole before the quarterly audit next week. If you don't get it, you go to prison for fraud." The silence that followed was absolute. Beatrice dropped her spoon. It clattered loudly into her bowl, splashing bisque onto the tablecloth. "Paul," Beatrice whispered, "is that true?" Paul put his head in his hands. "I thought I could fix it." "Mum, I just needed more time." "He didn't have time," Veyron said, "and neither do you. Beatrice, because the Rutherford fortune isn't what it used to be. Is it?" Veyron signaled to Hugo. He produced a sleek black folder and slid it across the mahogany table. It stopped perfectly in front of Beatrice. "Open it," Veyron commanded. Beatrice opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the documents, widening with every line. This is impossible," Beatrice gasped. "The Rutherford Trust Fund has been empty for 5 years. Veyron narrated calmly. "Your lifestyle, the parties, the cars. This house is funded entirely by credit, high-interest loans. You've been borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. And guess who owns the debt?" Beatrice looked up, terror in her eyes. "No." "Yes," Veyron said. "The Valerius Trust bought your debt 6 months ago. Every credit card, every mortgage, the loan on Paul's Porsche, even the financing for that necklace you're wearing. I own it all." "Why?" Paul asked, his voice hollow. "Why would you do that?" "To protect you," Veyron said, a flash of genuine pain crossing her face. "At first, I thought if I controlled the debt, I could stop the banks from foreclosing on you. I wanted to save my husband. I thought, eventually, you would treat me like a partner, and we could fix this together." She took a sip of wine, a 1982 Chateau Margaux. "But then," she continued, "I realized you didn't want a partner. You wanted a punching bag. And Beatrice, you wanted a slave." "I am your mother-in-law," Beatrice screeched, standing up. The desperation made her reckless. "Family helps family. You can't hold this over us. It's immoral." "Immoral." Veyron laughed. It was a dark, rich sound. You made me scrub the floors before the guests arrived today. Beatrice, you made me serve hors d'oeuvres to your friends while they laughed at my clothes. You told me I was a sheep made for slaughter. Veyron leaned forward. The candlelight danced in her eyes. You were right about one thing. There is a slaughter happening tonight. But I am not the sheep. She turned to Chadwick. Mr. Kensington, what is the current assessment of Rutherford Private Equity? Toxic, Chadwick said simply. Insolvent. We recommend immediate liquidation. Do it, Veyron said. No, Paul shouted, jumping up. Veyron, stop, that's my company, that's my life. Your life. Veyron stood up. Hugo moved with her, his hand resting on the back of her chair. Your life was with me. Paul, I was your life, and you let your mother treat me like garbage. You let your sister mock me. You let your ex-girlfriend humiliate me. She looked at Lydia. Lydia, get out. Lydia didn't wait to be told twice. She grabbed her purse and ran out of the dining room, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. Brittany, Veyron said, turning to the sister who was currently trying to hide behind a floral arrangement. You said I was embarrassing, that I looked like the help. Brittany shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I was drunk. Tori. I didn't mean it. You always mean it, Veyron said. That's the problem. You're honest only when you're cruel. Hugo, have Brittany's car towed. She's not fit to drive. She can walk home. It's 10 miles, Brittany cried. Then you better start walking. Veyron said. Brittany looked to her mother for help, but Beatrice was staring at the financial documents like they were a death sentence. Defeated. Brittany fled the room. Now, only Beatrice and Paul remained. You want to save the company? Paul Veyron asked. Yes. He wept. Yes, please, I'll do anything. And you, Beatrice, you want to keep this house. You want to keep your standing in Greenwich. Yes, Beatrice whispered, her spirit broken. Please. Veyron, I apologize. I'm so sorry. Apologies are cheap, Veyron said. I need collateral. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a document. It was a single sheet of paper. She placed it on the table. This is a post-nuptial agreement, Veyron said, and a transfer of deed. What does it say? Paul asked. It says that I own everything? Veyron stated. The house, the company, the cars, the furniture. Everything transfers to the Valerius Trust immediately. In exchange, I will allow you to live here. I will allow you to keep your job as CEO, under my supervision. You want us to be your tenants? Beatrice gasped. Your employees. I want you to know what it feels like, Veyron said coldly. I want you to wake up every morning knowing that the roof over your head and the food on your table is provided by the woman you called a nobody. I want you to be grateful. She slid a gold pen across the table. Sign it, or Hugo makes the call, and by tomorrow morning, the marshals will be here to evict you, and Paul will be under arrest for securities fraud. Paul looked at his mother. Beatrice looked at her son. The arrogance that had defined the Rutherford dynasty for generations evaporated, replaced by the primal fear of poverty. With a trembling hand, Paul picked up the pen. He signed. He slid the paper to Beatrice. She wept openly, her mascara running down her face, staining her cheeks black. She signed. Veyron picked up the paper. She checked the signatures. She handed it to Hugo. File it, she said. Consider it done, Your Highness. Hugo said, tucking the document into his jacket. Veyron looked at her husband and mother-in-law one last time. They looked small, pathetic. "Enjoy the lobster," Veyron said. "It's the last meal you'll eat as owners of this house. Tomorrow, the staff reports to me, and things are going to change around here." She turned and walked toward the door. "Hugo, I'm tired. Take me to the Pierre Hotel." "Wait," Paul called out. "Veyron, are you coming back?" Veyron stopped at the doorway. She didn't look back. "I don't know. Paul, I suppose it depends on how well you behave. I'll be watching." She walked out, Hugo close behind her. As the heavy door swung shut, the Rutherfords were left in the silence of their grand, empty dining room, the taste of ash in their mouths. But the story wasn't over. Veyron had secured her power, but she had also made dangerous enemies. And in the shadows of the Rutherford Empire, a secret even darker than financial fraud was waiting to be uncovered, a secret that involved the death of Paul's father, and a connection to the Valerius family that even Veyron didn't know about. The transition of power was swift and brutal. By 9 a.m. the following morning, the Rutherford estate, once a sanctuary of old money arrogance, had been transformed into a fortress. 2 black SUVs idled in the driveway, flanked by men in earpieces who checked the ID of every delivery driver. The neighbors, peeking through their silk curtains, whispered that the Rutherfords must be under federal investigation. They were half right. Inside, the atmosphere was funereal. Beatrice sat in the sunroom, her hands shaking as she tried to pour tea from a silver pot. She was no longer the mistress of the house. She was a tenant on probation. Veyron had allowed her to stay, but the terms were humiliating. Beatrice's credit cards were frozen. Her social calendar was cancelled, and she was restricted to the East Wing. The library door swung open, and Veyron walked in. She wore a tailored white suit that screamed authority, her hair loose and flowing. Hugo was, as always, a shadow at her back. "Good morning, Beatrice," Veyron said, not looking up from the tablet she was holding. "I've reviewed the household accounts. You spend $40,000 a month on floral arrangements that ends today. The gardener has been instructed to plant seasonal vegetables. If you want flowers, you can grow them." Beatrice set the cup down with a clatter. "Vegetables in the rose garden? Veyron, you can't be serious. What will the neighbors think?" "The neighbors think you're bankrupt," Veyron said, finally looking at her. "Because you are. Unless you'd prefer to move to a condo in Jersey City." Beatrice pressed her lips together, silencing herself. "Where is Paul?" Veyron asked. He went to the office," Beatrice mumbled. "He said he had to prepare for the audit." "Good. Hugo, get the car. We're going to Rutherford Private Equity." The drive to the financial district was silent. Veyron watched the city skyline approach, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She hadn't taken over the company just to punish Paul. She had done it because the Valerius intelligence network had flagged an anomaly in the Rutherford books, a recurring payment that didn't make sense. When they arrived at the glass and steel tower, the reception was icy. The employees, who had heard the rumors, stared as Veyron marched through the lobby. She didn't stop at the reception desk. She walked straight to the CEO's office. Paul was there, frantically shredding documents. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his tie loosened. "Veyron." He jumped, trying to block the shredder with his body. I wasn't expecting you." "Obviously," Veyron said, stepping around him. She hit the reverse button on the shredder. "What are you hiding?" "Paul." "Nothing, just old tax returns. Irrelevant stuff." Hugo stepped forward, gently but firmly moving Paul aside. He pulled a handful of half-shredded paper from the machine. He scanned it, then handed it to Veyron. "It's a ledger," Hugo rumbled. "Offshore accounts, Cayman Islands." Veyron scanned the fragments. One name appeared over and over again. Project Obsidian. "What is Obsidian?" Veyron asked, her voice low and dangerous. Paul collapsed into his leather chair, burying his face in his hands. "I don't know. I swear, I don't know. It was my father's. When he died." The payments continued automatically. "I tried to stop them last year when the cash flow got tight. But what?" "But I got a phone call," Paul whispered, looking up with terrified eyes. "A man. He didn't give his name. He just said that if the payment stopped, what happened to my father would happen to me." Veyron froze. "Your father died of a heart attack on his yacht." "That's what the coroner said," Paul said, his voice trembling. "But the autopsy report was sealed. Mother wouldn't let me see it. She just said we had to pay. We had to keep paying." Veyron looked at Hugo. The giant bodyguard's expression had shifted from stoic to alert. "Obsidian," Hugo said, his voice dropping an octave. "Mum, we need to leave. Now." "Why?" "Because Obsidian isn't a project," Hugo said, unholstering his weapon and checking the chamber. "It's a call sign for the Syndicate, the organization that killed your uncle in Monaco." The blood drained from Veyron's face. The Valerius family had many enemies, but the Syndicate was a ghost story, a group of mercenaries and corrupt bankers who erased wealthy families and absorbed their assets. They were the reason she had lived in hiding for so long. They were the reason she had pretended to be a nobody. "They've been bleeding the Rutherford fortune dry," Veyron realized, blackmailing them. Suddenly, the building's fire alarm began to blare, a harsh, rhythmic screeching that made it impossible to think. "We're being flushed out," Hugo barked. "Paul, get away from the window." Crack. The floor-to-ceiling glass of the CEO's office shattered as a high-velocity round punched through, impacting the mahogany desk exactly where Paul had been standing a second before. Paul screamed, scrambling backward on the carpet. "Down!" Hugo roared, tackling Veyron and covering her with his massive body. "Sniper high-rise, 3 o'clock." Another shot rang out, destroying a vase near the door. "They know," Veyron gasped, pressed against the floorboards. "They know I'm here." "They don't just know," Hugo growled, speaking into his wrist comms. "They were waiting. Alpha Team, Sector 4. We are taking fire. I need an extraction route. Now." "My mother!" Paul yelled, crawling toward them. "If they're here, who is at the house?" Veyron's eyes widened. "Beatrice." "Hugo," Veyron said, gripping his arm. "We have to get to the house. The ledger. The original ledger must be there. If Beatrice has been paying them, she has the records. That's what they want." "It's a kill box, Mum," Hugo warned. "It's my family," Veyron said firmly. Even after everything, she wouldn't let them be slaughtered. "Move." The drive back to Greenwich was a blur of evasive maneuvers. Hugo drove the armored SUV like a tank, jumping curbs and weaving through traffic at 90 miles per hour. Paul sat in the back, hyperventilating, clutching the door handle. "Pull yourself together, Paul." Veyron snapped from the front seat. She was tracking the security feeds from the estate on her phone. "The cameras are down. The perimeter alarm has been bypassed." "They're going to kill her," Paul sobbed. "They're going to kill Mom." "Not if we get there first," Hugo said, drifting the heavy vehicle around a corner and accelerating onto the private road leading to the estate. When they breached the front gates, the scene was chaos. The 2 security SUVs Veyron had stationed there were smoking ruins. Her guards were engaging in a firefight with men dressed in tactical black gear who were advancing on the main house. "Stay in the car," Hugo ordered. "Lock the doors. Do not open them for anyone but me." "No," Veyron said, reaching for the door handle. "Ma'am." "I am the Grand Duchess of Valerius," Veyron said, her eyes blazing with a cold fire. "I do not hide in cars while my home is invaded. Give me a weapon." Hugo looked at her for a split second, assessing her resolve. He reached into the glove box and handed her a compact Sig Sauer. "Safety is off. Aim for center mass." He kicked his door open and rolled out, his assault rifle already firing. Hugo was a one-man army. He moved with terrifying efficiency, dropping 2 of the attackers before they even realized he was there. Veyron stayed low, moving behind the cover of the fountain, with Paul scrambling behind her. "Get to the side door!" Veyron shouted over the roar of gunfire. They made it to the servants' entrance. Veyron kicked the door open, and they spilled into the kitchen, the same kitchen where she had washed dishes just 24 hours ago. Now, it was a battleground. "Mum," Paul yelled, running toward the main hall. "Paul, wait!" Veyron screamed, but he was gone. She chased him into the foyer. The scene that greeted them stopped them cold. Beatrice Rutherford was on her knees in the center of the room. Standing over her was a man with slicked-back grey hair and a scar running down his cheek. He was holding a gun to her head. "Mr. Archer," Veyron said, recognizing him from the Interpol database, the syndicate's fixer. "Grand Duchess." Archer smiled, though his eyes were dead. "We've been looking for you. You did a good job playing the mouse, but cats always find the mice eventually." "Let her go," Paul begged, stepping forward. "Please, I'll give you whatever you want." "I want the ledger," Archer said. "Beatrice says it's in the safe, but she seems to have forgotten the combination. Perhaps if I shoot her son, she'll remember." He shifted his aim toward Paul. "No," Beatrice shrieked. "It's 0409. It's his birthday. Please." "Touching," Archer sneered. "But I think we'll tie up loose ends anyway. The Rutherfords have been unreliable assets." He tightened his finger on the trigger. Bang! The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Beatrice screamed. Paul flinched. But it was Archer who fell. Hugo de Vries stood in the doorway, smoke drifting from the barrel of his rifle. He had taken the shot from 50 feet away, threading the bullet past Paul's shoulder to hit Archer squarely in the chest. "Secure the room," Hugo barked, as his tactical team, the Alpha unit that had finally arrived, swarmed through the windows, neutralizing the remaining syndicate mercenaries. Veyron ran to Paul, checking him for injuries. He was shaking, but unharmed. She looked at Beatrice. The older woman was staring at Veyron with a look of total shock. "You," Beatrice stammered. "You saved us. After everything I did to you. You saved me." Veyron holstered her pistol. She stood tall, smoothing her suit. "I didn't do it for you, Beatrice," Veyron said coldly. "I did it because no one touches what belongs to me. And for better or worse, this family is my responsibility." Hugo walked over, kicking Archer's gun away. He checked the body. "Target neutralized. The police are 5 minutes out. We have to control the narrative." Veyron nodded. She turned to Beatrice and Paul. "Listen to me carefully," she commanded. "This was a robbery gone wrong. These men were thieves, targeting the art collection. My security team intervened. That is the story. If you mention Obsidian, if you mention the Syndicate, we are all dead." Do you understand? Beatrice nodded rapidly. Yes. Yes, I understand. Good. Veyron walked over to the fireplace and looked at the portrait of Paul's father, William Rutherford. Now, Beatrice, the truth. Why were you paying them? And don't tell me it was just debt. Beatrice slumped against the wall, looking years older than she had that morning. William didn't die on the yacht, she whispered. He was laundering money for them. He tried to skim off the top. They found out. They made me watch. Paul gasped. Mom, they said if I didn't keep laundering the money through the company, they would take you next. Beatrice sobbed, reaching for her son. I was protecting you. Paul, I made you marry Lydia because her father is a judge. I thought he could protect us. But Veyron, she was just a civilian. I thought she would be safe if we drove her away. I had to be cruel. I had to make her leave before they noticed her. Veyron stared at her mother-in-law. The cruelty, the insults, the humiliation. It hadn't just been snobbery. It had been a twisted form of protection. Beatrice had tried to force Veyron out of the family to save her from the crossfire. You should have told me, Veyron said softly. How could I? Beatrice cried. You were just a girl from the library. How could I know you were... This Veyron looked at Hugo. They shared a silent look. The dynamic had shifted again. The Rutherfords weren't just villains. They were victims. Broken, flawed, and desperate victims. Hugo, Veyron said. Clear the house. Get the legal team here. We're going to need to restructure everything. And the syndicate? Hugo asked. They struck first, Veyron said, walking toward the window to watch the police sirens flashing in the distance. Now, we strike back. I'm tired of hiding. She turned to Paul. You wanted to be a CEO. Paul. You wanted to run a company. Paul wiped his eyes. I don't know if I can. You will, Veyron said, but not Rutherford Private Equity. We're burning that to the ground. We're starting something new, something they can't touch. She extended a hand to him. Are you with me? Paul looked at his mother, then at the dead mercenary on the floor, and finally at his wife, the woman who had turned out to be the strongest person he had ever met. He took her hand. I'm with you. 3 months had passed since the siege at the Greenwich estate, but the air atop the Manhattan skyscraper felt lifetimes away from the suffocating silence of the Rutherford mansion. The launch of the Valerius Rutherford Foundation was the most anticipated event of the New York social season, a dazzling convergence of old money and new purpose. Veyron stood alone on the terrace, the wind playing with the hem of her emerald green silk gown. Around her neck, the Valerius diamond stones that had sat in a Swiss vault for 20 years caught the fractured light of the city below. She wasn't hiding in the corner anymore. She was the summit. Nervous. The voice was familiar, but the tone had changed. Veyron turned to find Paul standing in the doorway. He looked different. The softness of the spoiled trust fund boy was gone, replaced by a leaner, sharper edge. He had spent the last 90 days working 18-hour shifts, helping Veyron's forensic accountants dismantle the tangled web of the syndicate's financial networks. He wore his exhaustion like a badge of honor. No, Veyron smiled, turning back to the skyline. Just thinking. About what? Paul moved to stand beside her, keeping a respectful distance. About how far we've come, she murmured, and how close we came to losing it all. Paul nodded, looking down at his hands. I saw Brittany today. She's actually working, a receptionist at a gallery in Chelsea. She complained that her feet hurt and the coffee was cheap. But she looked happy. For the first time, I think she's actually proud of herself. Good, Veyron said softly. Structure is good for the soul. The glass doors slid open again. Beatrice Rutherford stepped out. She was dressed modestly in charcoal grey, devoid of the flashy jewellery that had once been her armour. In her hands, she carried a silver tray of champagne. She wasn't a servant. Veyron had offered her a comfortable stipend, but Beatrice had insisted on helping with the event coordination. It was her penance, her way of finding utility in a world where her status no longer mattered. The guests are waiting. Veyron, Beatrice said, her voice quiet and respectful. There was no venom left in her, only a fragile sort of peace. Senator Sterling is asking to introduce you. Veyron looked at her mother-in-law. The woman who had once forced her to scrub floors was now serving her a drink, not out of fear, but out of gratitude for salvation. Thank you. Beatrice, Veyron said, taking a glass. You've done a wonderful job tonight. Beatrice flushed with genuine pleasure, a rare smile touching her lips before she retreated inside. From the shadows of the terrace, a mountain of a man stepped forward. Hugo de Vries adjusted his earpiece, his ice-blue eyes scanning the perimeter one last time. "Ma'am." Hugo's deep voice rumbled, cutting through the ambient noise of the party. "The perimeter is secure, and we just received confirmation from Zurich." Veyron stiffened slightly. "And the indictments are unsealed," Hugo reported, a rare flicker of satisfaction crossing his scarred face. "The syndicate leadership was arrested by Interpol an hour ago. The network is dark. You are safe." Veyron let out a long, trembling breath she felt she had been holding for years. The debt was paid. The ghosts of her uncle and Paul's father could finally rest. "It's over," she whispered. She straightened her spine, the steel returning to her posture. She walked back toward the ballroom, her husband on one side, her loyal protector on the other. As she entered the light, the room fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned to her bankers, politicians, socialites. But this time, there were no sneers, no laughter. There was only awe. Veyron took the microphone from the senator. She looked out at the sea of faces, then at Paul and Beatrice, and finally at Hugo. "They told me I was nothing," Veyron began, her voice ringing out clear and strong across the hall. "They told me I didn't belong, but power isn't about where you come from, or the name you were born with. It's about what you're willing to fight for when the darkness comes." She raised her glass, the diamonds at her throat blazing like stars. "To the future. To the future." The room roared back, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. Veyron Valerius smiled. The invisible wife was gone. The Duchess had arrived, and she was never looking back. And that is how the invisible wife took down an empire and built a new one from the ashes. Veyron didn't just get revenge, she got justice. It makes you wonder how many people are being underestimated right now, just waiting for their moment to reveal their true power. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, secrets, and sweet redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. What would you have done if you were Veyron? Would you have forgiven the family? Or left them to rot? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.